Now some news. A leading cardinal appears to be claiming that the Church could consider and approve the priestly ordination of women. Vienna Archbishop Christoph Schönborn, whom Pope Francis entrusted with the public rollout of Amoris Laetitia, said in a recent interview that the question of female ordination can, quote, only be clarified by a council and cannot be decided upon by a pope alone. He told Austrian journalists that the question is too big to be decided from the desk of a pope. Cardinal Schönborn's comment implicitly, if not explicitly, rejects Pope St. John Paul II's 1994 declaration on the matter in an apostolic letter where he wrote, "I declare that the Church has no authority whatsoever to confer priestly ordination on women, and that this judgment is to be definitively held by all the Church's faithful." Back in Rome this week, the Pontifical Commission for Latin America has called for a new synod of bishops on the theme of women in the life and mission of the Church. And Mass attendance is continuing to fall among American Catholics and has hit an historic low. For the first time since Gallup began tracking the habits of the faithful more than 60 years ago, fewer than 4 in 10 Catholics, only 39%, attend Mass any given Sunday. That's down from 45% 10 years ago. In 1955, that number was 75%. Moreover, for the first time, Catholics are going to church less than other Christian denominations. About 45% of Protestants attend church weekly. Catholic numbers are being dragged down by 2 age groups. Only 1 in 4 young adults, ages 21 to 29, are attending Mass. And perhaps surprisingly, those brought up in the years immediately following the reforms of Vatican II, ages 50 to 59, are attending Mass just 31% of the time any given week. Seniors, Gen Xers, and millennials are all attending Mass in the 40 to 49% range. One other interesting note from Gallup, the loss of faith is apparent across religions in America. A little more than 20% of adults brought up Catholic, Hindu, Jewish, or Muslim have left the faith of their childhood. Here with analysis of this new papal exhortation, Rejoice and Be Glad, is the Papal Posse. Editor-in-Chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal, and from Manhattan, canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father GERALD Murray. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I want to jump right in. On Wednesday, it was publicized that the Pope had sent a letter to the Chilean bishops. In it, he admits he made grave errors of judgment in Chile's sex abuse scandal and invited the abuse victims he had discredited to Rome to beg their forgiveness. In the letter, he wrote, "I have fallen into serious mistakes of judgment and understanding of the situation, especially due to a lack of truthful and balanced information. Now I ask pardon of all those that I have offended, and I hope to be able to do so personally in the coming weeks." Now, here's my question. If indeed there was a breakdown of truthful and balanced information, what is the source of this? Robert Royal.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that's a good statement that he put out there. It's tough to admit you made a mistake on a very serious issue like this, and he took full responsibility for it. However, the question now is, what was the process? You know, where was the breakdown? Now, many people say that Cardinal Errázuriz from Chile, who he's very close with, and is on the cardinal that committee of 9 cardinals that advise him, was primarily the conduit of the information. And if that's true, of course, that presents a problem. But I would take this one step further, and I would say if I were the Holy Father, because this is a very important issue, not only inside the Church, but for people outside the Church.
Right.
I think he needs to review the process of where he's getting information from. Because, you know, in Italy they have a joke, they mention this all the time, that it's the circolo magico, the magic circle around him manipulates whatever information that he's getting on particular issues. And we see it very pointedly here. When he was warned, when there were massive protests,
Right.
he spoke very sharply back to the people who were accusing this bishop, Baros, and almost accused them of being, in fact did, he called them tontos. He said, you're stupid, this calumny, you need evidence for this. And in fact, he was getting the wrong information. So I think he's got to undertake a thorough review of the process by which he's receiving information on these very serious issues like this.
Father Jerry, you'll remember how vociferously the Pope wagged his finger at those who were trying to get his attention at the rope line in Chile to get him to react, because he had appointed this Bishop Juan Baros in Chile, who these victims claim was a witness to their abuse at the hands of this Father Calamara. Your thoughts on what this means, and why do you think the Pope is coming out with this letter now, begging forgiveness?
Well, I think he realized after being in Chile that he had to act on this, that it was the topic that dominated the headlines while he was down there. My question is, when is Bishop Baros going to be removed? There's nothing about that in the letter. And I also agree with Bob, there has to be a review, because he said he was lacking truthful and balanced information. So either things were being kept from him, or he was being given untruthful and unbalanced information. The process canonically has to be laid out clearly. What happens when a bishop is accused of having participated in the sexual abuse of minors? That's clear with priests, so we know what happens. With bishops, it's a little more mysterious. And right now, I think that's an area that needs to be firmed up in canon law.
And the fact is, the Pope made this man a bishop nonetheless. So wrap up on this topic, Bob.
Yeah, I also think we need to look more carefully at the committee in Rome that has been tasked with dealing with this problem of abuse, because we know that Cardinal O'Malley personally, who was the head of that committee,
Right.
personally handed a letter from those victims to the Holy Father some months ago.
Yeah, we interviewed one of them, Juan Carlos, yeah.
And therefore, the Pope gets a lot of things handed to him. Now, it's easy, he could have mislaid it. But when your own cardinal, who's the head of an important commission, hands you something, I think you either have to read it yourself, pass it to somebody that's going to make something happen. And then on top of this, as we know, regrettably, that committee was allowed to lapse almost simultaneous with this controversy. So there's a lot of structural re-examination that needs to go on here, and probably not only on this subject.
I want to move on to the Apostolic Exhortation, the big papal news of the week. It was released on Monday, and it calls all people to holiness. It reiterates and reinforces some of the Church's core beliefs about holiness, sanctity, and the spiritual life, while also seeming to take aim at some of the Pope's critics in the Church. He clearly states, holiness is experiencing, in union with Christ, the mysteries of his life. It consists of uniting ourselves to the Lord's death and resurrection in a unique and personal way, constantly dying and rising anew with him. The Lord asks everything of us, and in return, he offers us true life, the happiness for which we were created. He wants us to be saints and not settle for a bland and mediocre existence. Your take on this, give us the flyover on this exhortation, and then we'll dive into some other particular moments. It is, and it's called Rejoice and Be Glad. It's to focus everyone on sanctity, holiness. Your thoughts?
I wrote a column this week on this at the Catholic Thing, in which I regretted that because of the divisions that have gotten even worse under this papacy, when he puts out a document that's largely good like this, we can't read it without suspicions, or that we can't read it without controversy.
And why is that?
Well, because one set of people read it one way and one set of people read it another. Two of my readers wrote to me and said, you're the one exacerbating all these differences in the church, as if somehow we created this large-scale international controversy. On the other hand, other people are writing me and saying you were perhaps too charitable toward him. You tried to say that there were good things in here. So
you must be looking into my mailbox. I get this every week. Well, don't shoot the messenger. I'm not the Pope. All we do is cover this. I do think people sometimes, look, we all love the Holy Father. I think the viewers of this program do. It is up to us to respect him enough to take the words and evaluate them in a context of the times and of the moment. And if we look the other way for portions or pretend we're not seeing it, we're letting that audience down, and we're not being, to my mind, good Catholics. So I'm sorry to interrupt.
Well, I mean, you get the point that I'm trying to make, is that whether we like it or not right now, at this point, because of the divisions in the church, and by the way, just today there was announced that Georgetown is going to have a conference next month about overcoming divisions in the church, at which Cardinal Supich and Archbishop Gomez from Los Angeles are going to be featured on a program with various other people as well. So it's not as if EWTN or the Catholic thing, or some obscure theologians have decided that they have a bone to pick with the Holy Father. There is a serious division now, and it comes to the fore even when he's trying to deal with a relatively non-controversial subject like holiness.
Yeah. Father Jerry, to my mind, when I read it, there are homey, wonderful insights here, and kind of parts of it almost reminded me of Mother Angelica's spirituality. Very practical at moments. He uses the Beatitudes to illustrate, how to be holy, and he clearly states our mission in Christ. Your impression overall of this apostolic exhortation?
Well, I enjoyed the parts that dealt with the supernatural life, that in fact our mission is not simply to be a worldly provider of goods, in the church. We're not just there to console people with charity. We're there to bring them to love God, and to do that we have to love God ourselves, and that the love of God is in the first place a gift of His grace that we respond to. So that part I liked. But I got to the sections where the Pope deals with what he calls neo-Pelagianism, and I just said to myself, wait a minute, what's going on here? Then there's another section on neo-Gnosticism, and as I think we'll discuss right now, these are, in my opinion, very serious problems in this document, because he seems to be defending the controversial parts of Amoris Laetitia by lashing out at people that don't agree with him. And I find that very, very troubling.
Well, let me read that section to you and then get your commentary on it. This is what the Pope says. Not infrequently, contrary to the promptings of the Spirit, the life of the Church can become a museum piece or a possession of a select few. This can occur when some groups of Christians give excessive importance to certain rules, customs, or ways of acting. The gospel then tends to be reduced and constricted, deprived of its simplicity, allure, and savor. This may well be a subtle form of Pelagianism, for it appears to subject the life of grace to certain human structures, only to end up fossilized and corrupt. Who do you think he's talking about there, Father Jerry?
It seems to me he's talking about those who object to what he wrote in the 8th chapter of Amoris Laetitia, where he's saying in some cases, people who are in invalid second marriages can be given Holy Communion while remaining in those adulterous unions. And for me, there's nothing, you cannot categorize obedience to the Ten Commandments as a defect. And it is not a museum to say that what Christ said 2,000 years ago is what I believe today. In fact, human structures are not the matter here when it comes to the sacramental life of the Church. The Church has taught solemnly that the 7 sacraments were given to us by Christ. So is the moral law, so is the natural law. That's part of God's creation. So when I hear the Pope more or less stigmatizing people who say, why are we changing what St. John Paul II told us to do, that's not the way we should be doing things. If there are legitimate reasons why the Pope thinks his point of view about giving communion to the divorced and remarried can be defended on the basis of Catholic doctrine and tradition, state them so that we can have a dialogue. This seems to be a discussion ender where he basically, with invective, stigmatizes those who don't agree with him. And as you say, we love the Pope. I respect and love the Pope, pray for him all the time. But I think, honesty, we have to say, Holy Father, when we think you've made a mistake, charity demands we tell you that.
And I think the sex abuse situation is a good example where not only we called attention to this, but the New York Times, Time Magazine, and you saw the reaction. The Pope looked at this anew, realized he had gone off course, and now he's correcting himself. Let's talk here about the rigidity. When he talks about rigidity of these structures, as you raised in your piece, are Catholic universities, social service groups, are they rigid, fossilized? Is that who he's talking about?
Yeah, see, what I was trying to get at with that particular part of the column is I agree entirely with Father that this seems to be a self-defense. And the odd thing about it, quite apart from the problems, the philosophical and theological problems, both the Gnostic and the Pelagian sections, I think are very, very poorly written, and they're not really first-rate thinking on these subjects. But quite apart from that, if we step back from it for just a second, and we look around the world, and I'm sure all of us visit various countries in the world, is it true that at this moment in the history of the Catholic Church that the problem is rigidity? I think it's exactly the opposite, in fact. I mean, we've got scores of colleges and universities that churn out students who've maybe gone to Catholic schools their whole lives, have gone through 4 years of college, and know virtually nothing about the faith, and therefore respect very little in terms of rules about marriage or confession, go to communion. It seems on the large scale that it's exact opposite of what he's trying to present. Maybe in the past at some point there was this rigidity.
When, 1940?
In Argentina, but certainly now. And this is not even a Catholic thing. If you look around the secular world, people talk about we're living in a world that is post-truth.
Right.
You know, we're living in a world that is utterly chaotic, that has no fixed principles. So, as I said in the column, to want to hold on to some fundamental Catholic dogmas is not to be rigid, it's to be sane, to seek sanity in an utter chaos of the modern world.
I want to move on. There was the Pope at one point during the Chrism Mass mentioned something that I want to bring to your attention. He said this during his homily: "We must be careful not to fall into the temptation of making idols of certain abstract truths." I think this speaks to what we're talking about here. They can be comfortable idols, always within easy reach. They offer certain prestige and power and are difficult to discern. Because the truth idol imitates, it dresses itself up in the words of the gospel, but does not let those words touch the heart. Much worse, it distances ordinary people from the healing closeness of the word and the sacraments of Jesus. Father Jerry, your reaction to that? Can truth be an idol?
Well, when I read that, I was pretty shocked, because truth is not an idol. In fact, to call abstract truth, which basically means doctrines which are written down on paper, you can't touch a doctrine, but you can think about it, and it has the force of the truth because it's revealed by God or it's part of the natural law. When I read that the Pope was saying that you can make that into an idol, I was very stunned, because the truth is the remedy to idolatry. Let's not forget that in the world of paganism before the coming of Christ, immorality and evil were the result of people erring because they didn't know the truth. When Christ brought the truth, fulfillment of the hope of Israel, the light of the world suddenly shone on the whole world, and this is what we have now. We have Christianity with a definite body of teaching and doctrine, and we believe it fully. This very, very troubling, and I would say to the Holy Father, the problem in the modern world is not that people think that the truth is an idol. They just don't care about the truth because it's not being defended properly. And that's our goal. We've got to tell people, look, here's the truth. We're going to defend it against error, and we're going to make sure that society understands. If you don't live by the truth, the alternative is a dictatorship. The alternative is chaos, communism, Nazism, whatever you want to look at historically. No truth. It basically comes down to who has the biggest stick and who kills most enemies. That's not the way justice is achieved in society.
Yeah, well, I had letters from people who are certainly not churched people, who read that and said, I agree with the Pope. There's a big truth idol in all these organized religions. You know, I'm the person who's out here discerning my truth, and that's what we have to live. You would say what?
Well, I mean, that's the whole problem of the modern world. Look, the backdrop of the modern world is a dead scientific materialism in which there are no values instantiated in the world. There is no God. We'll all make up our own truth. And that starts to bleed over into the church itself. Now, look, if the Pope wants to say that certain priests and bishops are too hardline, there may be some somewhere. I have to say I don't really see that that's the case. But I would actually like to see a greater emphasis on the right uses of the truth, that we begin to introduce people into why it is that this will make your life happier. We have tremendous sociological data that shows that people who are in stable marriages, who stay married, have children, carry out all those normal functions that used to be part of human life, that the people who do that live well, are happier than their counterparts in the modern world. Unfortunately, the world that we're in right now, I mean, you see a country like Italy. Whoever thought Italy could be a country without children? Whoever thought that the West in general would be involved in the kind of cultural death where it's not reproducing itself? So there's something that has to be fought here. And I have to say, overall, since the very beginning, the Pope has not really wanted to argue these things. He kind of walks away from from these questions about truth and dogma, because they're hard. And we understand he's trying to invite people in, but we cannot lose this. Otherwise, we have nothing to offer people.
Mm-hmm. Something else I want to point out to you both. In the exhortation, Pope Francis seems to equate the pro-life cause with caring for migrants. He puts them on the same plane. Look at this. Some Catholics affirm that it is a secondary issue with respect to the serious issues of bioethics. Our defense of the innocent unborn, for example, needs to be clear, firm, and passionate. Equally sacred, however, are the lives of the poor, those already born, the destitute, the abandoned. Father Jerry, there doesn't seem to be a problem there. I mean, all he's saying is all human life is of worth. What's the difficulty here? I've seen a lot of articles and people grinding their teeth over this.
Well, the way it's been understood, and I think it's not unfair, is that he's equating the effort of the Church to stop abortion with the effort of the Church to help migrants. And, you know, I don't think that's a proper analysis of the situation. You know, 3,000 children a day are aborted in the United States. 3,000 migrants aren't being killed or imprisoned. So therefore, there's a complete magnitude of difference between how we help people who are basically, you know, violating the law by coming here illegally, but on the other hand, we want to be charitable and figure out a solution, to the fact that the government is protecting doctors who kill babies in their mother's womb and in some states pay for it. I mean, the outrage, you know, the Pope says it has to be passionate about the pro-life movement. Well, you know, we need some passion from all sectors of the Church on this matter. And I'm so proud of our bishops in the United States who do not let this issue die. But I don't see very much pro-life fervor in a lot of European countries. And I think the Pope should put, you know, light a fire under them about that.
Is this the return of the seamless garment, championed and advanced by Cardinal Joseph Bernardin, that many of us frankly thought with John Paul and Benedict had been dispensed with? This idea that all these issues occupy the same moral plane?
At least in this country, I think one of the underlying problems when we read something like that is that that argument has been used for years by the Democratic Party to basically do nothing. And in fact, to continue to support and foster an abortion culture in the United States. So by putting those things on an equal plane, it reduces the urgency of dealing with abortion, which, as Father was saying, is ongoing murder of human beings on a daily basis, just reduces it to another political issue. I'm quite willing to admit that migrants, true refugees, not just you know, people who claim to be refugees, do have a moral claim on us. But those things are prudential judgments. If we look to Europe, if we look to the United States, to Mexico, people are very nervous about refugees appearing on their doorstep, immigrants trying to enter illegally when they are very hard to assimilate. In a country like Italy, where thousands of people arrive from North Africa every week, they have a 50% youth unemployment rate. So in a country like that, where you're trying to prop up young people, prop up the family, encourage people to have children of their own. These are judgments that have to be weighed against who you're going to admit to your country. And right now, the European Union is not doing a very good job with this. So that's why we call this prudential. There are complicated things. In the case of abortion, we just have to stop the murder of children in the womb. You want to help out women who are in difficult circumstances, fine, that's another question. But we're talking about the destruction of human innocent life, which has always been prohibited by Catholic moral thought.
I want to try to get to two quick other segments here of this exhortation. One involves the Pope mentioning very clearly here the dangers and ways of the devil and how he is to be avoided. He's clear that that is an individual person moving through the world. This seems at odds with that Scalfari interview a few weeks ago, where, according to Scalfari, the Pope said hell does not exist. Father Jerry, your thought on what we're hearing now as opposed to the Scalfari report and the non-clarity coming out of the Vatican media apparatus on this?
Yeah, let me say that the Scalfari interview, where he claims that the Pope said the hell doesn't exist and that those who are damned, their souls go out of existence, this is a very serious matter, because Scalfari is not a guy who stumbled in off the street and then making claims based on not having talked to the Pope. He was invited by the Pope for the 5th time. He's done this in the past where he composes stories about what the Pope has said. The denial from the Holy See was basically a journalistic note saying you can't trust that every word which is in the quotation marks is an actual reproduction of what the Pope said.
Right.
Well, that's true, but there's a more basic question. Was the substance reported by Scalfari the substance of what the Pope said? I use an analogy. It's a little bit shocking, but let's say the Pope Scalfari said, Pope Francis told me that Nazi racial theory was actually part of the Christian worldview and that we have to relook at it. Do you think the Holy See would have taken that sitting down and simply said, well, don't trust that the words in the quotes are accurate reflection? They would have denied it outright. Of course, Nazi theory is horrendous, but so is the idea that there's no hell. That is a direct contradiction of Catholic truth. It's in the Bible. The Lord spoke about it many times. And as people have pointed out, if there is no hell, then what did Jesus save us from? So I think with the Holy Father, I hope and pray, and I'm glad he talked about the devil.
In the exhortation,
but let's have a little more clear exposition that what Scalfari said is wrong.
I want to put another. Do you want to weigh in on this quickly?
Well, I just would add that this isn't the first time that Scalfari claims that the Pope has said that annihilation occurs.
In 2015,
there have been several instances of this, and either this is a fixation of Scalfari's or in some fashion the Holy Father is playing some kind of
carom. And I have to say,
shot.
the exhortation sounds a lot more like Francis. If you read his daily homilies, he's always talking about the devil's here, the devil's there, the devil's here, the Lord of this world. I mean, he's always been clear on this. So, again, that dissidence doesn't help anybody.
Well, I would also point out that it took a long time for them to respond. It took almost a whole day in Rome for them to respond to this. And there are stories that a highly placed cardinal, not an Italian, together with other cardinals in whose name he spoke, called the Holy Father and said, you've got to respond to this because this is a disaster.
Oh, it was a train wreck. Very quickly, I want to get to this question of contemplation. The contemplative tradition in the Western Church is rich and deep, and yet this is what Pope Francis writes in this exhortation. We'll close with this. He says, it is not healthy to love silence while fleeing interaction with others, to want peace and quiet while avoiding activity, to seek prayer while disdaining service. Everything can be accepted and integrated into our lives in this world and become a part of our path to holiness. Now, Father Spadaro, the Pope's pal who ghostwrites a lot of his columns, may have ghostwritten this exhortation to some extent, has come out and said that refers to, this notion that God or nothing is ridiculous, and, silence being the thing we have to seek is, not absolute. Kind of a sideswipe at Cardinal Sarah, who had two books similarly titled. Your reaction to what we heard there. What is this?
Well, again, to put this in the larger context, is there too much contemplation in the Church or in the world? I mean, at this point in history, we've lost this. And I was very glad to see the Holy Father quote John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, Teresa of the Child Jesus, because that's our wonderful contemplative tradition. I would actually argue the opposite. I mean, I think there are an awful lot of young people and not so young people in the Western world who turn to Buddhism and yoga and Hinduism because they are looking for a spirituality that is not just a spirituality of the everyday, but it's a spirituality that goes deeper, that really reaches those parts of our personality that are mostly, not on display on a daily basis. So if we were to bring forward what our contemplative tradition is, which doesn't mean having to neglect
and ignore
people, and whatnot. If we were to bring that forward, there's a whole segment, I think, of young people in the modern world who would pay attention, because it would show that the Catholic tradition has something to offer, something that the world doesn't have to offer, something that the other religions do not.
Yeah, Father Jerry, two of the greatest contemplatives I knew and met were Mother Angelica and John Paul II. They were hardly shrinking violets who stayed in the room all day. But is this, as some have written, a condemnation or dismissal of mysticism and the contemplative tradition in the Church by the Pope?
I don't think so. I don't think the Pope would ever do that, but I think he's underestimating that prayer is a form of service. And in fact, the prayers offered by the contemplatives are like the powerhouse that generates, this overflow of grace, which allows other people to do good works. So, and there's an antagonism sometimes here in what the Pope says to people who are not out there with the smell of the sheep kind of image. You got to go out there, walk in the slums. Well, yes, people have to do that, but not everybody. I think the contemplative Carmelites who are praying for the people in the slums make possible the good work that others will do. So I wish he had drawn that connection. I'm sure he would agree with that. It was, not artfully stated.
Finally, this commission, a Pontifical Commission for Latin America, has proposed that Pope Francis convene a synod on the role of women in the life and mission of the Church. I want to give each of you a minute to react to that. It seems we have synod fever these days. There's the Young People's Synod, the Amazon Synod, now the Women's Synod being proposed. What's going on here? Is this needed?
I don't know. They're asking the Pope to organize this synod. I have a feeling they were asked to ask him, is the way I would put this. I'm very worried about all these synods now, because we've seen that. I was at the Youth Synod, of course, several weeks ago, and yet again, like the synods on the family, it starts out in a very good direction. Building up the family, engaging young people, dealing with women, whatever it might be. However, we just know that there are a lot of forces in the modern world that look at events like this as an opportunity to put something together quite different than the Catholic tradition. And I have a feeling, it's only a feeling, but because of these divisions, as I said earlier, because of the kinds of things that we're suspicious about, even in otherwise innocent contexts.
Well, because of the two synods on the family that ended up with Amoris Laetitia.
I think we're likely to see this go in a direction that is going to be bothersome.
Father Jerry, your reaction also. You saw Cardinal Schonborn, which we reported earlier, coming out and telling a group of journalists that the ordination of women is a question that could be decided by a council, opening the door, it seems, to this question.
This is an earthquake this past week of bad ideas, and that's one of the worst things I've heard lately. Cardinal Schonborn was the principal author of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, in which he accurately and faithfully responded to this question by saying that the Church judges it be impossible to ordain women because the will of Christ was manifested that he only chose men. For Cardinal Schonborn to say that the Pope alone can't decide it, the Council could, this is a decided matter. Now, back to the other question about a synod on women. For me, this is pandering to secular worldview, which basically says if a woman can't do everything else that a man can do, then she's being treated unfairly. Well, in that case, the problem starts with Adam and Eve, because God made us different, and each has its vocation. Jesus Christ only chose men to be ordained ministers in his church. Let's be clear about that. That was not an arbitrary decision. That was a divine decision. By definition, all divine decisions are good and holy. I know of no real problem, and this is my observation, no real problem in the life of the church because women feel that they are separated from God by the existing way the church is. I think there's a bunch of unhappy women, feminists, and their allies who are basically trying to do a takeover move on the hierarchy and say, we have to be priests, we have to be bishops, otherwise you are not being fair and godlike. No. You do not contradict Jesus Christ's will in the name of trying to put into effect what you think Jesus Christ would have done. We know what he did. So let's just be clear here. Manipulation of opinion by, synod organizations, we got to have a synod on this, a synod on that. No. Why don't we just sit down and read the gospel and read existing Catholic doctrine and say, where do we all fit into this? For me, the happiest people in the world are like Mother Angelica and Mother Teresa. They had so much authentic power because of love and grace. The fact they couldn't celebrate Mass or sit in a bishop's chair, that's irrelevant. That's not how... The church is about holiness, as the Pope told us.
Frankly, the two women you just mentioned would make bishops and did make bishops tremble, and they had more influence than any bishop I've ever met, that's for sure. Father Jerry, we'll leave it right there. Robert Royal, thank you for being here. You can follow Father Gerald Murray and Robert Royal's commentary at thecatholicthing.org.